Hi Duck fans! This is Wolfgang Fuchs and I got a treat for you. Right here and now I'm going to present the interview with Don Rosa, which I made in 2011. Originally, the interview was intended for publication in Germany in the Donald Duck Sonderheft, but as luck would have it, Don Rosa was hard pressed for time and felt it impossible to answer my questions in writing. However, by coincidence, Jano Rohleder was visiting Don in Louisville, Kentucky, and he suggested he could record the interview with his camera, and that is just what happened. Don read my questions and meticulously answered them. Jano sent me the soundtrack of the interview in advance so I could prepare the interview for the magazine. He later on sent me the entire video recording, which you are about to see now. Obviously, I had to have some kind of idea as to what the answers to my questions were going to be in order to give the written interview the flow of a live interview. Happily, this worked out. However, some of the answers were so detailed that I had to edit and somewhat condense the interview so it would fit into the magazine as a two-part feature. This version was published in German in issues 289 and 290 of the Donald Duck Sonderheft. But here, for the first time, you will see the interview as it was originally recorded. It is almost 2 hours long, and as you will find out, Don and Jano took a lunch break somewhere in the middle. And now, without further ado, here is the interview with Don Rosa. Enjoy.
Jano. So Jano's here with his camera, and I've got some printout of some questions that Wolfgang sent me. And instead of typing all this, maybe I'll read the questions and answer them verbally, by mouth, instead of by finger. So let's see what we have. You once said that you got interested in comics even before you could read, thanks to the comics your sister had collected. Could you elaborate? Well, when I was born, I had only one sibling. I had a sister, and she was 11 years older than I was, and she still is. But she was a comic book reader and more specifically a comic book hoarder. She kept every comic book she ever had. So she had a closet full, thousands of comic books. And I don't remember having lots of toys when I was a little kid, but those were my toys, her comic book collection. So I was looking through them long before I could read. Literally since birth, I was exposed to thousands of comic books. And most of them, of course, in those days would have been Dell comics, and most of those would have been Disney comics. And of course, my favorites, just like everybody in America in those days, and everybody still in the rest of the world, were Marx's Ducks, the stories by the good artist. But I liked other ones. I liked Little Lulu comics. Those are brilliantly written and very strangely drawn comics that were also excellent. It's a little bit harder to define what made those so good. I think a Marx comic is very easy. You can tell by the artwork and the story, the plots. Little Lulu comics, of course, were just about a little girl and her friends around the neighborhood. And they were still almost just as good as the Karl Barks adventures. And I think they're recognized around the world too. I think they printed those in Europe, and Fantagraphics or other publishers have put out collections of hardback box sets of Little Lulu, but I like Little Lulu. But she had all the other Dell comics, the Warner Brothers characters, and the MGM characters, all the funny animals. She didn't have any Archie comics. In America, girls usually read Archie comics with Betty and Veronica, but she didn't have a single one of those. What other kind of? She had some Harvey comics. Those are ones with Wendy, the good little witch, and Casper, the dead baby, or whatever he is, the friendly ghost. But those were kind of cute and simple. I always thought that the dumb kids used to read the Harvey comics with Casper the Friendly Ghost and that junk, and the smart kids would read the Uncle Scrooge comics. Could you elaborate? I don't know, what else? I remember my sister would give me a stack of comics, and once I put them in the drawer in my bedroom, and when I finished either looking through those or eventually reading them, then I was allowed to go up and swap it for another stack of comics. But then when she got to be in her late teens, I guess, by the mid to late 50s, no, I guess she was buying them all the way up until she was 18, 19 years old. So I grew up with comic books that were dated from the late 40s to the late 50s. So it's actually, I have the memories of a comic book reader 10 years older than myself. If it was just up to me, I may have not, if my parents would have even bought me comics, I wouldn't have been looking at them until I would have started in the late 50s. So I was exposed to comic books as if I were 10 years older. Now I remember when my sister stopped buying them, I even specifically remember finally going to the Woolworths, the 5 and 10, and looking at the rack of comics. I was going to pick some out for myself. And of course, for the Donald Duck comics, I even remember the issue of Donald Duck I got, and I got home and read it, and I didn't like it. And I knew it was, I didn't have really a concept of different writers or artists, but if I did, I figured that the artist or the writer that I liked, whoever he was apparently not doing Donald Duck comics any longer. The thing was, it was an issue of the title Donald Duck, and Karl Marx had only done the first, the earliest issues of Donald Duck, like 10, 15 years earlier. But a kid, I didn't analyze it that way. I just got a Donald Duck comic and I didn't like it, so I stopped buying Donald Duck comics and started buying Superman comics after it. But I just stopped buying comics altogether from about 1960 to 1963. I think because I was exposed to them so early, I outgrew them early. I lost interest. And I started getting interested in monster movies and science fiction movies. I was always just as big a movie fan as I was a comic fan. So how much did he want me to elaborate? I'll just keep, I always give answers that are much longer than people wanted. I say, it's enough, it's enough, it's enough. Stop kissing Garami back there, making noise. But let's see. So I didn't get back into comic books until about 1963. From about 61 and 62, I was buying monster movie magazines and building monster models, and that was a big craze in the United States in the early 1960s. But anyway, let's see, what's his next? The stock of comics you got from your sister, was that the core of your comic collection? I mean, you apparently got rid of most of them at one time, then bought the comics again and started collecting. What comics did you and do you continue to collect? I just lost interest in my sister's comics, and they stayed in the closet under the steps, and I just ignored it for 3 or 4 years. And then, like I said, in 1963, I started collecting Superman comics. The Superman family of comics. Of course, there's Superman and Action Comics and Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane and Adventure. Those are the titles that the Superman character was in. And so I would go down to the used magazine shop downtown, and I found out they would exchange comics 2 for 1. So, and I didn't have any money, so I slowly liquidated her entire comic book collection. I don't remember what kind of shape they were in. I'm sure they were kind of beat up, because I'd read all of them so many times over and over. For between me and her, they'd been being read constantly for 15 years, I guess, by then. But I'd slowly swap them for Superman comics, or I guess for pennies that I would buy new Superman comics with. And I only kept 2. I remember which ones they were. One was Karl Barks's The Golden Helmet, which is my favorite Donald Duck story, which I love because it was a historical treasure hunt. And the other was the first issue of Uncle Scrooge. I didn't know it was the first issue because in America it had a number of 386 on it. It was an issue of 4-color comics. It was a title that every issue was some, it was a test series. Every issue was a different topic. One would be a Disney character or a Disney movie. The next would be a Warner Brothers character, or the next would be a John Wayne movie or something. And if a character caught on, then he would graduate to his own comic series, like Donald Duck did, and lots of others. But that was Uncle Scrooge I was talking about. The first issue of Uncle Scrooge was in this 4-color comic series, and I just loved it because of the story was all right, but primarily I liked it because of the characterization, which seems kind of deep for a little kid, but I just was fascinated by how I loved the way it talked about Scrooge's early life. There was some elements of sort of similar to My Life of Scrooge in there, and I loved that. And then I loved the way it summed up what his philosophy of life. Listening to strange sounds outside. It must have been a truck going past. So only those two, and I've still got one of them. Along the way, I lost track of the Golden Helmet issue, and probably gave it to a friend when I got a better condition copy. In fact, another friend I gave the first issue of Uncle Scrooge to when I got a much better copy, and I found out later that he had it, and by that time I recognized the significance of having one of the original comic books I grew up with. And I would have had that one since I was like 1 year old. That's when my sister would have bought it. So that comic had been in my life since I was 1 year old. It was published in 1952. So I managed to get that back from him. I had to buy him a better condition copy though, so that probably cost me a couple $100 to get my comic book back. Let's see, apparently got rid of most of them. I got rid of all of them. And I got one back finally. I've replaced them all. I've got them, later on I started collecting all those same Dell comics. So I've got all of my sister's comics back, plus tens of thousands of other ones. So I don't just have all the comics she had, I have full sets of all the comics she had, whereas she just had certain issues. What comics did you and do you continue to collect? I never stopped collecting anything. It's one of my problems. Once I start something, I continue it forever. I just keep collecting more. In 1963, I started collecting Superman comics. In about 1969, I started collecting, no, it's 1967, I started collecting Marvel and DC, all the current superhero comics. And I think within a year, I was collecting everything published, except, again, not the Harveys or the Archies. But I was collecting any superhero or science fiction or horror. There weren't many of those in the late 60s. They came back in the mid 70s, but any science fiction, or if they had any jungle adventure, or collected everything virtually. By that time, we didn't have cowboy comics anymore. The Western comics disappeared in the late 50s, early 60s. Marvel comics still had the Rawhide Kid and the Two-Gun Kid and a few, so I was buying those. Oh, and the War comics. Buying the War comics also. So I started to collect, and then going to comic book conventions, and when I became contact with the comic book collectors around the country, I found out about all the comics my sister didn't have. Because American comics in the late 40s to the late 50s were just so wide. Anything you could possibly imagine was in comic books. The way I guess it still might be in Europe. Of course, American comics now, it's just superheroes. And it's been like that since the 60s. But American comics all through the 50s were every possible kind of comic book genre that you could ever imagine. And when I found that out, seeing all the stuff my sister didn't buy, I went nuts and I started collecting everything, in particular horror comics. There were a lot of horror comics in the early 50s. And science fiction comics, and the very best of all are the EC. The same company that created Mad Comics, which later became Mad Magazine and is still being published today. In fact, if you get a Mad Magazine, I don't know, they have them in Germany, but at least the Mad magazines that are still published now in the United States, you open them up and you look at the publisher, and it's EC Publications, just like, but they're the company that did Tales from the Crypt, and the Vault of Horror, and the Haunt of Fear, and some science fiction. So it's easier to say what I don't collect. But I've got virtually a full sets of everything in American comics from the late 40s on. I had them from the late 40s to the mid 80s, and then it's already been about 5 years ago, a friend sold all my new comics. The comics I didn't really care about, the comics published in the 70s and 80s. Those are all those insipid superhero comics. And he sold those for me, so now I've still got all my comics from the late 40s to 1970. I never was very interested in the comics in the earlier 40s, back into the 30s. They weren't that good, but I really like the comics, the American comic books that started in the late 40s. And I still collect them. I'm starting to collect more. For instance, Dell Comics, next to their funny animal comics like Disney and Warner Brothers, their other biggest genre of comics were their Western comics. They were all based on TV or movie cowboys. And just a few years ago, I finally started collecting those and having a lot of fun digging those up. That's enough of that. Let's see. Mr. Rosa, not counting the comics you did as a 6-year-old. Makes it sound like I only did comics when I was 6 years old and didn't do them again until I was 26. No, I've been doing comics ever since I can remember. You started out as a cartoonist on the university paper Kentucky Colonel. By the way, was it K-E-R-N-E-L or K-E-R-N-A-L? It was K-E-R-N-E-L. I never did have anybody explain that to me, but I think it's a pun on, you've heard of the Kentucky Colonel, C-O-L-O-N-E-L. But so this is not a colonel like in the military, this is a kernel of information, I guess is the idea, Kentucky Colonel. One might argue with good reason for either version. Oh, he's talking about the spelling. So you started as a cartoonist, what's his question? Oh, he just wants to know how to spell colonel. Anyway, you contributed so many illustrations to the Kentucky Colonel that one might argue that you always wanted to be an artist or a writer, or at least someone who wanted to get published. What moved you to work for the university paper? I was somebody who liked to be published. I like to draw. Primarily I like to tell stories, but they couldn't use they didn't have comic strips. And they, of course, didn't have a comic book at the university, but they had the college newspaper. I worked on the grades when I was in grade school. I worked on the grade school newspaper. I was the editor of the grade school newspaper, such as it was. And then in high school, I was always all 4 years of high school, I was the cartoonist on the high school newspaper, and doing all sorts of drawings. Never editorial cartoons. You don't have editorials in high school. Certainly not in a Catholic boys' school. But I do any sort of illustrations they needed, and any sort of illustrations that anybody in the school needed for programs and so forth. But in college, the only thing there you could do as far as cartooning went was the editorial cartoons for the newspaper. And in those days, I was never very politically minded, not intensely. And those were intense days in the United States in colleges, the late 60s. It was a lot of political upheaval. But I wasn't too concerned. I was only interested in comic books and movies and TV in those days. I still am, but I was strictly interested. Became very politically minded later in life, but not in those days. So I wasn't interested in doing editorial cartoons. I just liked to draw, and when I drew something, it was nice if it was published. I did eventually, after a couple of years, convince them to try a comic strip, the Pertwilliby Papers. You might get to that later on down his list of questions. Let's see. You started the Pertwilliby Papers, yeah, in the Kernel, and later on continued it in newspapers and fanzines. Was it always intended to run along the lines of B movies? I guess by that he means old movie serials. Yeah, sort of making it a precursor to the Indiana Jones movies. Yeah, Indiana Jones was supposedly based on the old adventure serials of the 30s and early 40s. Of course, I'd never seen those. I knew a lot about movies, but I'd never seen movie serials. Things like Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe and The Spider and The Shadow, all the movie serials that came out during the 30s to the mid-40s. I guess there were a few still in the 1950s, but I'd never seen those. I just liked doing comedy adventure stories, like Karl Barks stories. But as far as the Pertwilliby Papers, yeah, I knew to get the editors interested in a newspaper comic strip for a college newspaper, it had to be like Doonesbury. I think that's what they wanted. They approached me and said if I wanted to do a comic strip, it had to be something like Doonesbury, which had just started like a year earlier. So this would have been about 1972, 1971. So I created a sort of a Doonesbury type cast of characters the first semester, and midway through that I turned it into sort of an adventure comedy involving anti-abrasium, which I later used in a Uncle Scrooge story. And then the next semester I turned it completely into an adventure story. And that's when I did that Son of the Sun story that later became my first Uncle Scrooge adventure. And this was 10 years before Indiana Jones movies came out, maybe at least 8 years before the first Indiana Jones movie. But that the editor of the newspaper didn't want. I think he even didn't like the adventure aspect in the first series. Yeah, that's what happened. And so they fired me at the end of that semester. And so I had to wait a year until they had a new editor. And that's when I went back, and this editor was happy to have just a pure comedy adventure comic strip. So that's when I did the Son of the Sun. Okay, while drawing the Pertwilliby Papers, you also started doing indexes, beginning with the Scrooge McDuck Index in 1971. All right, I'm not sure if this was, did I do that in 1971? Maybe he's right, but what I recall is after I graduated from college and got home and was working in the family construction company, the Kino Rosa Company that my grandfather started at the turn of the century. That was boring, and I had to have a creative outlet. And of course I was very active in reading and doing artwork for comic book collector fan magazines, the fanzines. And these are, of course, are little, like to say, unintentionally non-profit publications done by teenagers usually about comic books. And the ones that fascinated me especially were ones that did indexes of old comic book series. I was always kind of anal retentive, obsessive compulsive disorder. I like to have, or to be more polite, I was like an archivist. I had a librarian mentality. That's why when I collect comic books I have to have a full set. Even if there's a series of them, of a particular title that is very poorly drawn or just, I still have to have them because I have to have a full set. So I'm sort of an archivist mentality, and I love doing indexes and doing research. So there was one magazine that I would contribute lots of indexes of comic book titles that he needed, and I did, one of the first ones I did, of course, was an Uncle Scrooge index he's referring to here. And then he says, but you didn't only do comic indexes, you also compiled information on many TV series. What made you do that? Well, what happened was the guy who did this, it was called the Information Center, which was in the RBCC. That's the Rockets Blast Comic Collector fanzine. That's the oldest fanzine and the biggest circulation fan magazine there was. And this column had actually even started in a different fanzine much earlier. It had been around for over 10 years. I think it started in 1961 in one of the very first comic book fan magazines. And by somebody else, and then there was this, the current author of it, and he said he was getting tired of doing it, so he knew I liked to write indexes for him, and he asked me to take it over, and I said, sure, that'd give me something to do. And that I really enjoyed, but like he's asking me, I had to immediately branch it out into my other fields of interest, not just comics, but movies and television, and anything else. I'd take, this was a question and answer column. Readers would send in questions and I'd research them and publish the answers to their questions or lists of what they were asking for, and always at the end of each, let's see, the magazine came out about every 6 weeks, I think. I do 3 different indexes. I do a comic book title index and a movie index, like movie series. Back in the 30s and 40s, there were lots of movie series. Like The Thin Man, or Charlie Chan, or many, many others. Or I'd index a TV series, which I could do because I have a full set of TV Guide magazines, which were the small magazines that were very popular in those days, that would come out every week and tell you everything that was on all 3 networks for the coming week. Can you imagine? There was only 3 networks. So I did that, and what made me do that? That's just, I was interested in it, and I loved being, I found out what made it so great was I was interested in all of these things, but I wouldn't go doing the research on my own, and maybe I wouldn't know what to research, but when somebody asked me a question, that caused me to get out a stack of old comics that maybe I wouldn't have, because I was collecting comics so fast and not really knowing what was in lots of them. It was just amassing huge collection of old comic books. Or I would get out the TV guides and research a TV series that maybe I never watched. Or find out about a movie series or an actor that I didn't know as much about as I wanted to. So accepting these questions had me constantly researching deeper in all of my main interests. So that was a lot of fun. Let's see, I always admired your work on the indexes because it was something I did. This is Wolfgang. I did on a smaller and less public scale in Germany. Do you still make or like to make indexes? No, I don't make them, and I don't need to make them. I like to brag that in those days, in the 70s, when somebody had a question about a movie or a TV show of any age, new or old, I was the only public source in the world where somebody could go and write a question to, and I would research it in depth and do indexes of TV. And you understand, when an index of a TV series, I'd list the title of the episode and the plot, and sometimes the directors and writers, and then the names of the characters with all of the actors. I could get that out of the old TV guides, and I'd put that in these TV indexes. But I was the only place in the world to get this sort of thing. But the beauty of it is now you have the internet. Just pop this computer open and ask any question about movies or television or anything else in the universe, and you got the answer. Probably correct. So I'm glad I don't have to do those anymore. And I certainly wouldn't be doing them now when everything you need to know in the world, important or unimportant, is right there in the computer. It's floating all around us now in the air. How did you get to work for the Rocket Splash Comics Collector and later the Comic Reader and other fanzines? I buy copies of them through the mail, and I'd look at them and I liked them, and I'd write to the editor and say, can I do some artwork? And they'd say, sure. That's all. It's all free, you know, nobody pays for any of this, it's just because we love doing it. Thanks to your comics or to the fact you took over the information center. Thanks to your comics. Oh, he's thanking you. Thanks for your comics. Huh? You're welcome. Anyway, your work with the indexes in your early comics assured you of a first taste of fame in the States, didn't it? Yeah, I guess so. I was what the expression sometimes used by science fiction fans, a BNF, a big name fan. I suppose so. Yeah, I was working for the highest circulation comic fanzine. I was apparently the most popular author in the columnist in the magazine, and even my even my question and answer columns were funny. You know, I was a comedian. I wouldn't give straight answers. I'd give sarcastic answers or funny answers. Let's see. Yes, made me well known among comic fans and to some extent among the comic professionals. I guess people like Stephen King, he used to be a comics fan. He probably used to read my column. I've found out other people who are in now in the movie industry used to read my information center because they were movie fans and TV fans then. I see on the internet now and then when I'm doing a Google for DONROSA now and then, which is fun, late at night. I think just yesterday I came across somebody who writes books about movie and television and said that he used to read Don Rose's Information Center in the Rocket Splash. So, anyways, lost my place. How did I get to working for the RBCC and other fame? Did you have an idea where you would go from there, from being well known as a comics fan? No, I had no intention. It was just a hobby. I knew I was going to run the family construction company. I always knew that. That was a curse on me. If I hadn't been born into a family that had a successful construction company, I might have actually done something with my life. I would have had to have picked a career, and surely I would have gone into. I've often thought that my interest in movies, ever since my earliest memory, and I can't explain that as easily as I can explain why I like comic books so much, because my sister had all the comic books. But I also remember my earliest memories, like when I was 5 or 6 years old, watching old movies on television. I don't remember watching cartoons. I'm sure I did, but things I really enjoyed were old movies. So I've always been a movie buff. I think it's something to do with stories. Just with comic books. I didn't enjoy drawing. I liked telling stories. In movies and television, it was a story. It was so I like stories. Anyway, if I hadn't been born into a family with a construction company, I dreamed that maybe I would have been Steven Spielberg. I more than likely would have gone into movies or television rather than comics, because I couldn't draw that well, but I could tell pretty good stories. So I might have been Steven Spielberg. I might have made the Indiana Jones movies. Did I have an idea where I would go from there? Like I say, no, I had no intention ever of doing this for a living. I just stumbled into it. To Captain Kentucky, which you did from 1979 to 1982. Well, I didn't know I was going to do Captain Kentucky. I got invited to do that, I think, by the local newspaper. Let's see. You put away your drawing stuff in 1982, thinking that it'd be for good. Yes. Should I explain that? I did Captain Kentucky in the newspaper until, well, let's see. I did the Bertolli papers in the fanzines for a few years. while I was still doing the information center. And then I took the Lance Petrolaby character that I used in the college newspaper, and I turned that into that was a daily strip. I turned it into a comic book style story. In other words, long, or 10 or 12 page chapters of long adventures. They'd be maybe 60, 70 pages long. And then after that, when I was invited to do a weekly, call it a Sunday style newspaper comic strip, I took the same character, Lance Petrolaby, and changed him into a funny superhero, Captain Kentucky. I live in Kentucky, and of course there's Captain America and Captain Britain and so on. So that was the joke. It's Captain Kentucky. But I did that for 3 years and realized that nobody was really paying any attention to it. And I was putting a lot of work into it. Like everything I do, I do it, certainly didn't do that to make money. It paid $25 a week, which came out to about $2 an hour at the time I put into it. So I just do it because the thrill of telling funny stories. And of course, having them published so at least somebody would see them. Which is different from the comics I did all through my childhood. Nobody saw those. I did those just for myself, just because it was fun to tell stories. So in 1982, I just got bored with it, and by then I was married, and I had a house and dogs and fish, and life was much too complicated. And I was in much more duties at the Kino Rosa Company. So in 1982, I actually killed the Captain Kentucky character in the 150th episode, after 150 weeks, just short of 3 years. And then, yes, like he says here, I put my little drawing table that I'd had since the mid-60s, and I still have. It's the only drawing table I've ever used. I seriously put it down in the basement, and what didn't really have any art supplies to speak of, but I put those down in the basement, and I figured that was it. I was never going to draw again, because it wasn't, the only reason to do it was for fun, as a hobby, and it wasn't fun anymore. It was too tedious. But when you saw the Gladstone Disney reprints, you decided to have another go at comics. Well, not exactly. I knew that was my chance to do the one thing I'd always dreamt of my whole life, ever since I was my earliest memory was to write and draw one Uncle Scrooge adventure. And I'd already done the plot, that the story that I did in the college newspaper. In my mind, I saw as an Uncle Scrooge story. But of course I had to put my own characters into it. So I didn't decide to have another go at comics like for a career. I just wanted to do one story. And so you called Byron Erickson, who then was Gladstone's editor, and ... question mark. Let's see, this is a long story. I was still collecting comics. I wasn't drawing any longer. This would be 1986. I think late 1986, and we had not had Disney comics in the United States for over 10 years, at least not on the newsstands. I think they were trying to market them in toy stores in little packets for a while, but comic books in America in general, the sales were plummeting in those days, and the publisher of the Disney comics just got out of the business. They had lots of other things they published. Cookbooks, crossword puzzle magazines, etc., etc. So when comic books weren't selling anymore, they just dropped them. So we had no Disney comics. And then Gladstone was a company formed by some of my friends, comic collectors that I'd known for some years, like Bruce Hamilton. I'd known him for years. I'd see him at the comic book conventions when I traveled around. And somehow they got the license to publish Disney comic books in North America. This is like 3 guys. How they could get 3 comic book collectors got the rights to publish Disney comic books in North America, because nobody else wanted it. It's the only thing I can. But saw their comic books on the stand in late 1986, and I was shocked first of all, that there's Disney comics again in the United States. But one of them had a cover that it was obviously a Karl Barks cover that I'd never seen, which wasn't possible because I had a full set of Karl Barks' comics and all the other Disney comics ever published in the United States. It turned out it was a Don Yipis cover. He can mimic Karl Barks' style and lots of different styles so well. And I bought that, and but at the time I still didn't consider doing an Uncle Scrooge story. I think it wasn't until another month or two went by, and they published a story that another comic collector I knew had done years ago, or a couple of years earlier. And right away I saw, oh, so they're not just doing reprints, they're using a story by this other fan artist. And so that's when I called up Byron Erickson, who knew me, like I said. Bruce Hamilton I knew real well. Byron at least had seen my work in fan magazines. And I told him on the phone that I was born to write and draw one Uncle Scrooge adventure, that it was my manifest destiny. I've told this story many times, and he can corroborate it. That's exactly what I told him. I said it was my manifest destiny, and I'd always thought so, but just to do one. And that's when I did, I turned my old newspaper comic strip, the college newspaper comic strip, back into, as it was in my head all along, an Uncle Scrooge adventure, this time a real Uncle Scrooge adventure. I'll cut a chart talking about how glorious feeling that was to me when that was even actually published. That was the greatest moment of my life. But make these answers a little shorter. Let's see. Yeah, your first, like I just said, your first Duck story for Gladstone was an adaptation of a Quilloughby story. Did you do any other adaptations of your earlier non-Disney work for the Ducks? Well, now we're jumping ahead some years. But yes, the first story was an adaptation of the story I did in college, the college paper. And I've done that other times. Like I said, I did Quilloughby Papers stories for fanzines in the mid to late 1970s, and I turned some of those into Duck stories later. Just if I thought it was a good plot, I figured, well, nobody's seen this except a couple of thousand comic book fans, so I can turn it into a Donald Duck story. The one that I did that was called Once and Future Duck, about time travel back into the days of King Arthur with Donald Duck and Gyro Gearloose. I didn't think that made a good Duck story, though. It was a good story, but just not a good Donald Duck story. That was, and I reused the anti-abrasium in the Uncle Scrooge story, and used it was a story about universal solvent, and I turned that into an Uncle Scrooge story. So yeah, I did that once every year or two. I'd dig into my old plots from the fanzine days or the newspaper days and turn it into a Uncle Scrooge story. You studied in order to take over the family business as a civil engineer, and you did for some time. That was before you decided to become a writer-artist? Sure. But ultimately, in 1982, you liquidated the family company to become a full-time comic artist. Any qualms about that? Let's see, it was 1988. I don't know what happened in 1982. At first, I was going to continue with the Kino Rosa company like 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and the rest of the week I would, I should jump back. I only intended to do the one Uncle Scrooge story, but it was so well received. In fact, it was nominated as the best comic book story of the year in the Harvey Awards, which were at the time like the Academy Awards of American Comics. Nowadays it's the Eisner Awards that seem to have gotten a little bit more important, but in those days the Harveys were and the first comic book I ever did was nominated as the best story of the year, so that's sort of impressive. And so many people liked it. I decided to do another and another. So I was, like I was saying, I was going to do the Kino Rosa Company half the week, and then write and draw Uncle Scrooge comics the other half of the week. But my partner, he was my uncle's stepson, so he wasn't a Rosa. But he came to me and he said, well, you know, the company's in your name, because my name was Kino Don Rosa, and it was the Kino Rosa Company after my grandfather, and his name was not Rosa. So he said that the company's in your name, and if you're not that interested in it, why don't we just liquidate it? And then he was going to go start another company with a friend. And that's not something I would have ever suggested myself, but he suggested it, and I said, sure. Any qualms about it? Well, sure. My wife was married by then, and my wife was a teacher, so I knew it wasn't a very good paying job, but it was a steady job. So I knew I wouldn't starve, and I had it calculated out that with what little Gladstone paid, and they could pay very little. It was a tiny company, and they had pay huge royalties to Disney, so they had very low profit margin, and they couldn't pay. Might have been paying me half of what a standard comic book rates were. But with what they paid and what I could sell my original artwork to collectors, Disney fans and comic book collectors, I could make about half to two-thirds as much as I had been making, and I figured that I could just barely get by. But I'd be doing something that I really love, telling stories about Karl Marx's Uncle Scrooge. So I sure had qualms, yes. But I gave it a try. Around 1987, you also started doing work for Oberon. That's the Dutch publisher, and your work also got published in Scandinavia. Did you turn to the Dutch publishers, or did they ask for you because of what you had done for Gladstone? I don't remember what happened there. I knew Gladstone couldn't keep me busy the whole full time. In fact, they told me they lost money when they hired me to do a comic, but they didn't want to be known as strictly a reprint company. So they wanted to be able to publish a new story now and then, but they couldn't keep me doing new stories full time. So somebody put me in touch with the Dutch publisher. I don't know why. I was just beginning to learn that there were foreign publishers of Disney comics, which I'd never known. Being a typical American, I thought if something's not happening in America, well, it's not happening anyway. But I was just then starting to learn that they were publishing Disney comics in other countries, and somehow I got Gladstone people put me in touch with the Dutch publisher, and I started doing some short stories for them. I only did artwork for them because I kind of figured if I wrote a story, I'd try to write the best story I could, and hopefully I'd like the script when I was done, and then I wouldn't want to do it for the Dutch. I'd want to save that one for Gladstone the next time they wanted me to do a story. So I decided I'd just do the artwork. So I did, maybe, I don't remember now, it's over 20 years ago, but so I did a half dozen stories for the Dutch. That's the first page. Why don't we take a break now and get myself a glass of water and
Yeah.
okay, do a little more now till lunchtime. This is page 2. You quit working for Gladstone in 1989 and started working for Egmont in 1990. Why? If the reason was Disney's asking, interesting word, asking Gladstone not to return your originals to you, how was that matter then handled at Egmont? Well, yeah, everything was going along real nicely at Gladstone. Wasn't making a lot of money, but I was living the dream of my youth. Then I remember Bruce Hamilton calling me on the phone, talking about something, possibly the, I remember at about the same time I had written a script based on Karl Barks's unfinished Gyro Gearloose story, The Pied Piper of Duckburgs. So that might have been what he was talking to me about. And then in the middle of the conversation, just he said, "Oh, and by the way, Disney said we can't return your artwork to you anymore." So, what? By the way? Yeah, maybe he knew that was a much bigger deal than he was pretending, and maybe he was trying to soften the blow. Of course, that was like half of my income was selling the artwork, but aside from that, I was a freelance artist. I was self-employed. I was only selling the publication rights to my artwork, not the physical paper. So Gladstone could not legally keep the artwork, but I knew they didn't have a choice. If Disney was pushing them around, Disney told them not to return my artwork to me, they didn't have any choice but to do what Disney said, even though it was illegal. So I had to quit. There wasn't a question of trying to figure out if I could get by with making half as much as I was before he said those words. That would have been like 25% of what I used to make with the construction company. But I couldn't work for somebody who was going to steal my property. So I told him I had to quit. It's a matter of principle. And yet I was working on a story for him then. It was His Majesty McDuck, and I knew they had that scheduled for a particular issue, so I figured I'd go ahead and finish that. But I didn't. I had also been writing stories ahead. I had been because Disney, before they inflicted this on Gladstone, they were trying to make life difficult for them in any other way they could think of. I think Disney wanted the license back. They wanted to go into the comic book publishing business themselves for the first time ever. And they eventually did, and they failed miserably, and they ruined the readership of the Disney comics, and they eventually gave the license back to Gladstone, and Gladstone could never recover all the readership that Disney lost when they were. But anyway, before that, Disney was, after I'd been doing stories for a year, Disney started insisting on approving the scripts. Well, I guess they have that right. They don't do that with Egmont, but they, like I say, they like to bully around little Gladstone. So Hamilton submitted my script to His Majesty McDuck, but Disney was taking their time. You know, they didn't look at it. I think the event turned out for a month or two. So I figured, well, so I'll just write some more stories. And I wrote another story and sent it in. And, or actually, I don't know if I sent it in or not, but I said no. And then, have they approved it yet? And I said no, they haven't heard from them. So I wrote another story, and I wrote another story. I think it was like 3 full stories. And then they finally approved His Majesty McDuck. So Disney had already been doing that to him. And when that didn't seem to affect them, then that's when they told him not to return my artwork to me. So that shot me down out of the sky. So there I was without a job. I'd liquidated the family construction company. I had nothing to do, nothing to go back to. Since he's not asking the whole question, I won't just keep talking about all the other things that were going on at the same time. But as far as Egmont, when I finally was in contact with Egmont, when I worked for the Dutch publisher, they returned the art. Their policy was to return the art because they're not dealing with Disney in America. And the same with Egmont. When they did, but the Dutch publisher didn't need any more of my work. They actually didn't like my work, which is more credit to them. I mean, they had art directors who could see I wasn't a real cartoonist. I wasn't a professional level cartoonist, and so they stopped asking for my for artwork, our stories. I think the next thing I did was, well, like I say, he's not asking for too many details. But when I finally got in touch with Egmont, one of the questions they wanted me to work for them, and I said, can I have the artwork back? And they said, sure, nobody's ever asked for it back before. Let's see, next. Had you been aware of the developing fan following in Europe before your trip to Norway in 1991? No, I was completely unaware of it. I didn't know that when I did a story for Gladstone that any other Disney publisher in the world could use it for free. You know, there's no royalties paid in any of this. I've never made a penny royalty off any of my stories appearing in Germany or Norway or Finland or Java or Brazil or even in the United States. You get paid one time and then it's Disney property. But, I mean, I understood that. So I didn't, in 1989, 1990, I didn't know my stories had started to be used by the European publisher. And they were getting lots of reactions from the readership, the people who enjoyed my fannish enthusiasm. I mean, they can tell I wasn't a professional cartoonist, but they could tell I was enjoying what I was doing, so they liked the stories. I didn't know that, so that's one of the things that happened when I got in touch with Egmont. They were already familiar with me and already, I think, published a few of my stories. So no, I wasn't aware of that. Let's see, you started the life of Scrooge McDuck in 1993. Did you put in much research of the Barks stories, or did you also base your ideas on other sources? No, it was strictly Barks. I just had to check up on facts. I remembered all of the instances, like all of us Karl Barks fans did, the rare times when he'd have Scrooge mention something about his youth. There was a book by Jack Chalker that was also a biography of Scrooge McDuck, but and I've got a copy of that, and I remember looking through it, but I had to double check all of the facts in there because even though the book seemed to suggest that it was basing its Scrooge biography on Karl Barks, actually it based its Scrooge biography on the first 67 issues of Uncle Scrooge comics, regardless of who wrote or drew the story. So I had to double check and see if he had his facts right, but I didn't base my Life of Scrooge on whatever plot or series of events that Chalker had in his book, but I did check it to make sure he didn't have any Barksian facts that I had forgotten about. Let's see, you have stated repeatedly that basically you have put your stories in a time frame in the 1950s and early 60s. No, I've never said that. I put them in the early 1950s, never the 1960s, and that you have kept them there. Was that because you felt that, considering that people age, you would one day have to deal with the demise of Scrooge and didn't want to? No, I just did that because a couple of reasons. First of all, Barks said that that Scrooge was a cowboy in 1880. He said he was a sourdough in the Yukon in 1898. So I was doing these stories in around 1990, 1995. Scrooge would have to be 135 years old. And since I saw him as an actual person, not a talking duck, I knew that was impossible. So for that reason, I set the stories in the past. But mainly, I was just setting the stories in the time period when I was reading them. So this was all just fun for me. I was doing this like a fan. I was setting the stories at the same time that I was reading them as a child. It was sort of like when I created a story, I was sending it back to myself in a time machine. And I just see Scrooge as a character of the 1950s, the same way if somebody makes a Sherlock Holmes movie. They don't put Sherlock Holmes in the year 2011, they put him in Victorian London. That's where he belongs. If somebody makes a Doc Savage movie or a Shadow movie, they're going to put him in the 1930s. To me, it seems common sense. But it's just my personal viewpoint on it. So, I mean, I don't read any other Disney comics besides Karl Barks's, but if I did and I saw stories of Uncle Scrooge using a laptop computer, it wouldn't upset me. people do their own stories. I do my stories my way, other people do their stories. Whatever they like. But isn't the idea of considering the fictional characters of the Ducks as regular mortal people in sharp contrast to their seeming immortality and adaptability to modern times? I don't even know what he's talking about here. Seeming immortality. I don't see any seeming immortality or adaptability to modern times. You could adapt Sherlock Holmes to modern times too if you wanted to. It wouldn't be Sherlock Holmes. So it's, I'm so convinced that Uncle Scrooge's story should take place in the 50s that I can't even quite understand what the question is here. Let's see. Sure, the Klondike gets ever more improbable, right? But does that really matter? Well, it seems to matter to you. It matters completely to me. I can't imagine it not mattering to somebody, but oh well. What got you started on including the D-U-C-K initials? And why the occasional Mickey asides? I put, I don't know when I first realized the D-U-C-K, which of course is dedicated to Uncle Carl from Keno, my first name. I don't remember the moment in time when I was doing that Son of the Sun story, and it occurred to me that that could be a dedication, and so appropriate, Duck. But what got me started on was my dedication. The only reason I did these comics is because I enjoyed Karl Barks so much. So it's, again, it seemed like an obvious thing to do. Now the problem was that it looked like, to Disney, it looked like an autograph, looked like a signature. So it was removed from the first few stories. So then I had to start hiding it, because I wasn't going to leave it out, because it was important to me. So I started sort of hiding it in the picture somewhere. So it was still there, and then got to be a game with the readers, looking for the dedication. And why the occasional Mickey asides? Just wise guy. People think I hate Mickey Mouse. I don't hate him, I'm totally apathetic to him, because I never grew up with Floyd Gottfredson comics. I like the Paul Murray comics, okay, but my main attitude to Mickey Mouse is that it annoys me that he is so famous in America, and Donald Duck is, nobody knows anything about Donald Duck anymore. And even though Donald Duck's always been more popular than Mickey Mouse. In America, the classic characters are just t-shirt symbols. Like I say, the comics disappeared long ago, and even the ones that are published by Gladstone and Gemstone have very poor readership. I mean, a Gemstone Uncle Scrooge comic might sell 3,000 copies over the whole world. Donald Duck comics in Europe sell that much in maybe one neighborhood of a city. So, but Mickey Mouse is popular only because he's a t-shirt symbol in America, and so I poke fun at him in the backgrounds of comic books sometimes. I don't hate him, I like to poke fun at him. I like to humiliate him. How did it feel to receive the Eisner Awards in 1995 and 97? Well, amazing. Especially in America. Even though the general population doesn't see these comics, of course the other professionals, you know, the Eisner Awards are like the Academy Awards, are voted on by your fellow professionals, your peers. So that's the sort of thing I don't want to try to answer, and so that was a very profound feeling, so to put it simply. You added Arpine Lucane. Is that right? I always get myself confused between the original character was, yeah, Arsène Lupin. So I put Arpine Lucane. The Black Knight to the cast of characters of Duckburg in 1997. Any other additions? No. And the only reason I added the Black Knight is because I needed a character to put on the suit of armor that had Omnisolve, the universal solvent, on it, that was another adaptation of a comic strip I did in the fanzines. And a Beagle Boy wouldn't fit into that suit of armor, and Flintheart Clown Gold wouldn't fit into it, so I had to create a new character. But there's very little reason to create, there's no reason to create a new character in a Disney comic, because I don't think I could, but I'd be in the danger of creating a character that is as popular as Uncle Scrooge is. And it wouldn't belong to me any more than Uncle Scrooge belonged to Carl Barks. It would instantly become Disney property. So I just wanted to, plus I only like to use the characters that I grew up with. So I really didn't have an urge to create new characters. But in that story, I had to create a new character. And he seemed to be real popular. There wasn't a gentleman thief in the Uncle Scrooge comics. So right away, I was getting lots of requests for a sequel to that story, but the story was not designed to have a sequel. That was the only time I was going to use that character. So just to think up another plot that would involve the character that wanted to destroy Scrooge's money instead of stealing it, I finally came up with the idea of he wants to destroy his trophy collection. And I did that story, and so I would have never, I don't see how I could have thought of a third story to involve the Black Knight, but people really liked him. So let's see, here's one that I don't have the energy to try to answer right now. I don't have the eloquence to answer. You finally met your idol, Carl Barks, on August 12th, 1998. He's even got the date. What did you feel at the time? How did the meeting come about? Earlier, the then managers, he's got in quotes, of Barks had tried their hardest to keep you apart, right? Yeah, sure. They even, well, again, I prefer that the I and the world just forget they ever existed. It's the best way to treat them. Anyway, how did the meeting come about? That was partly because of them, but after Barks succeeded in getting out of their hands lawsuits, and Bruce Hamilton sued him and Carl Barks sued him, and after that was all over, Barks contacted me and wanted me to visit him on one of my trips out to the San Diego Comic-Con, because he wanted to make sure that everybody understood that he didn't have any animosity towards me like the fiction that was being created for about 5 years. So that was at Mr. Barks' invitation. Now, how did I feel at the time? I guess it's kind of like numb. People, lots of times, they said, what did you and Carl Barks talk about? Tell us all about your conversation. And it was my distinct point not to talk about comics. I wasn't going to go there and start telling him how much I loved his comics and this story and that. I knew he didn't want to hear that stuff. I knew that makes him uncomfortable, just like nowadays it makes me uncomfortable. It's flattering, but it makes me ill at ease, I should say, when I meet or get emails from people in their 20s or early 30s who grew up reading my comics. Because I can see the stories meant so much more to them than I ever intended for them. You know, I'm just trying to entertain somebody for 10, 15 minutes. In the same way Barks was trying to entertain people like me for 10 or 15 minutes, but it's when you're a certain age, these simple entertainments really have a profound meaning to you. So I wasn't going to get into that when I met Barks. We talked about his house and his paintings on his walls, and looked at his National Geographic collection, and we just talked. I asked to see his, I knew he played solitaire. One of his hobbies is playing solitaire and keeping a chart of his winnings and losings over decades, and now it made kind of a parabolic curve on a graph. So I just made a point of not talking about his comics until I was leaving. And then we were walking out the door, and I turned around and I said, I explained to him just what I'm saying now. I said, you know, I could have talked to you about how important you were to me in my whole life, and I knew that would just make us both uncomfortable. So, but I wanted to make sure he knew, and he knew. Let's see. In In 1999, your work for Gladstone ended due to problems between Gladstone and Disney. Not sure what that means. Is that when Gladstone lost the license? Yeah, and Gemstone got it later. Okay. Well, yeah, my work for Gladstone ended because they went out of business. So that's okay. Also, editors at Egmont did not use all of your material, so you worked more for the French Picsou magazine. Did they ask you to, or how did this come about? This sounds kind of jumbled. Let's see. How can I straighten it out? I was never doing any stories for Gladstone. I think I did covers for them when they printed one of my stories, because now the Egmont system, they don't have covers that match the stories on the inside. And in Gladstone, they would, especially if it's a Bark story or if it's one of my adventure stories, they wanted a cover that went along with the interior story. So the only work I did for the American publisher was when they reprinted one of my stories from Europe, I would do a cover for them. Or I might write a text to go with the story. So I worked for the French Picsou. I started working for them. I'd been in contact with the editor of Picsou because they were using their work a great deal, and I was hearing from him a lot, answering questions and so on. I think it was after the Life of Scrooge series, I really loved doing Life of Scrooge stories, and people seem to love them. I know that I get lots of emails, always have, from fans, because my email address is pretty well known. And I would say almost all the emails I get, or comments I get from people at conventions, say that they loved, above all else, they loved the Life of Scrooge stories. I can't say that, because it's literally 100% of every single person I talk to, every single comics fan, every single email I get, the first thing they say is, above all else, they love the Life of Scrooge stories. So I love doing them, so I wanted to do another one. I told Egmont, Byron Erickson, who I used to work for at Gladstone, that's another story. He left Gladstone Comics back in the late 80s, about the same time I did, and I eventually managed to, I can't say I got him a job at Egmont, but he got himself the job at Egmont. I just put them together because I knew there was a possibility. They were looking for somebody like him. But so he was then my Egmont editor, the same way he'd been my Gladstone editor. And anyway, he told me that they didn't want any more Life of Scrooge stories because people didn't like them. And I said, how do you figure they don't like them? And that's all the emails I get, say they loved them. And he says, no, publishers don't. Well, they say the publishers don't want them. And, I don't know what the sales are. They would never let me know what the sales are of the comics that have my stories, and I don't really care. I just love doing the stories. But that didn't make sense to me. And I knew I really wanted to do a Life of Scrooge story, and I knew people wanted to see them. And I knew the French wanted me to do work for them, so I asked the French editor if I could do a Life of Scrooge story for him. I wasn't quitting Egmont. Well, of course, I'm still self-employed. I'm a freelancer. I just work for whoever I want to. I just choose to work strictly for Egmont, and except in this case when they told me they didn't want another Life of Scrooge story. So I did one for the French publisher, but then I went, the next story I did was, of course, back for Egmont again. That didn't make anybody mad, I don't think, especially since Egmont used the story that I did for the French, and they get it for free then. They don't have to pay me to do it. But, I don't know what's going on in their heads. And then later, let's see, there was a story that Byron Erickson rejected. He didn't like it. It was called The Coin. It was a story that had, the story followed a particular coin out of Scrooge's money bin. It followed the coin around Duckburg rather than a character. Like the coin was the main character in the story, and Byron, I don't know if it was a policy of Egmont or if it was his own opinion, said they couldn't use a story that didn't have a Disney character as the main character. It was an Uncle Scrooge story, and, it was under the title Uncle Scrooge, but they said he couldn't use it because it did not have a focal character. And the French had been asking me for another story, so I said, okay, I'll do this for the French. Because after all, I've spent like several weeks writing it, and if I don't finish the writing, or if I don't finish the story, I don't get paid. So I went and did another story for the French. I just did those two. But they were just because I had a personal preference that I had a story that I wanted to tell, and Egmont didn't want me to do it for them, so I did it for the French, and then I'd go back to work for Egmont. And of course, Egmont also used the coin after it was theirs for free. It's all right. How did the quest for Kalevala for publication in Finland come about in 1999? Well, it was done for Finland, but it's done for Egmont. The Finnish publisher is not part of Egmont, but it's through some literally ancient business agreement dating back even to the 1950, back to 1951 possibly. They are a limited partnership, so they get all of their material from Egmont. I think maybe it has something to do with they don't have the rights in Finland to create material. They can assemble the material any way they want. They can publish it anyway, but they have to get the material from Egmont. Maybe Egmont gets a share. They don't tell me those details. But visiting Finland, I visited there a few times because Finland is where Donald Duck is the most popular than any other place in the world, and I can't explain why. But they were, before they did the Hall of Fame books from Egmont, which they have there in Germany, they were already doing very similar books of their own in Finland. The only difference was the Hall of Fame books do my stories in chronological order, and the Finnish publisher would just make a selection, I guess, based on, a representative, some long adventure stories mixed with some short gag stories, and maybe putting some of the not so good stories in with some of the really better stories so it'd balance out. Anyway, they'd been doing those books for a few years, and I'd visited there once every 2 years when they released a new one. And anyway, two things. Well, first thing when you visit Finland, you learn about the Kalevala, which is their national epic poem, written by Elias Lönnrot. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's he didn't really create the legends, but he assembled them into a book and wrote it in the verse like Longfellow used, like the Pewega Indians spoke. Anyway, that's there's two focal points of Finnish culture. One is the Kalevala, and the other is Aku Ankka, which is Donald Duck, because it's incredibly popular, the Donald Duck comics there. And people, other fans, when I meet them for those first couple of visits, were saying, if you combine the Kalevala with Donald Duck, you'd be elected president of Finland. And I'd say, ha ha ha. But actually, there was an election finally coming up, and I got to thinking, well, let's give it a try. Because people were telling me that Donald Duck would always get a very strong write-in vote as president of Finland. But that's how that came about. I mean, I didn't really think I'd be elected president of Finland, but I knew from my visits there that this would create a national sensation, and it did. When I did that story, and then went over there to help them promote the book that they put it in. They released it in a hardback book rather than the comic book first. That was one of the most highlights of my life. It was quite an experience to be the most famous person in an entire country for a week. I'll never experience that again. I was on every single national news program. I was on the front page of every newspaper. I was even on the front page of the science section of every publication found some way to talk about the Kalevala and Donald Duck in their publications. So that was. My wife always, when she sees the recordings of these appearances I make on national news shows in Europe, whether it's Norway or Finland or maybe Germany, or she says, "You look so relaxed. How can you be so relaxed? You're on national television." I say, I couldn't do that in America because I'd recognize Tom Brokaw or Katie Couric. I know these people, and I know I was on national television, so I'd be a nervous wreck. But when I'm in Europe, and I've never seen these interviewers before, I can relax. I can just tell myself I'm on some little local news show that a few thousand people are seeing. So it's easy if I don't know anything about what I'm doing. Apart from touring and signing books, are you still drawing duck stories, or have you stopped doing them altogether? And if so, why? Well, lots of reasons. I'll just go into the physical reason now. I don't want to go into the philosophical reason. Basically, the philosophical reason was the publishers, and I don't mean Egmont, but all the other publishers in the world and their policies finally broke my enthusiasm. My enthusiasm was the only thing that was driving me. My enthusiasm was the only thing that made my stories popular. It was the enthusiasm was my life, and they finally broke it, and I couldn't stand doing it anymore. But that's a very long and complicated discussion, and there are lots of other reasons, but the main reason was my eyesight. I have had poor eyesight my whole life, ever since I was, well, I guess my whole life. I've been wearing glasses since I was about 7 years old, and I mean thick glasses. And then I was starting to have trouble, every year it was something different. I think around 2004, I started, eyes were not focusing. I couldn't get the images together. One was up and one was down. So I had prism glasses. That's not a real serious condition. And then about a year later, I started getting floating substance. And I think when you get older, around 50 years old, there's this, I'd have to brush up on all the technical terms for it, but anyway, it was something in the back of the eye that starts to degenerate. But anyway, when I would look to one side and then look to the other side, some cloud would pass in my eyesight. So it was never in front of me, but worried me because I figured if that's going to stop in the middle, then I can't see anymore. But then, in 2008, I had a retinal detachment, and that messed my eyes up good. Messed up one of them, anyhow. And that's a long and nasty story. See how I can summarize it. But it was one day in, it was March, the same month, 2008, 3 years ago, this month. I had the sensation of seeing my nose out of my left eye. You can always see your nose out of your left eye, but for some reason I was, out of both eyes, but I was noticing it. It was something different. And then after a few more days, I finally was noticing that there was a blank spot. But when I'd look towards it, it would move. So I never could look directly at it, but I finally noticed that there was some blank area in this eye. And if I knew more about caring for my eyes, I would have known what was happening. So, but I went to, since I live way out here in the country, I only go into town once a week, and that was one of my downfalls. So I probably noticed it on a Monday, but couldn't get into the optometrist, who's not a doctor, he's just the guy who examines your eyes for glasses. I didn't get in to see him until Saturday, and by then it was like a thumbprint, and it was really obvious. And he examined my eyes, and he sees something happening in there, and he's going to make me an appointment with a retinal specialist on Monday. And I said, okay. And he said, now, if anything changes, you can call me right away. And I remember I noticed he was nervous. He was a young guy. So I know he knew what was happening to me. I don't know why he didn't tell me. He told me how serious it was. I'll never know that. If I was a red-blooded American, I'd sue him, like all red-blooded Americans do, sue everybody right and left. But so that was Saturday. On Sunday, it was a big, let's see, I think it was on Sunday when it was a big thumbprint on my eye. Just a blank spot, like I say. And then on Monday, he had made the appointment with a retinologist, and a retina specialist, a nice lady doctor. And I went in to see her, and she examined my eyes in 27 different ways. And then she said, okay, asked me if my wife was out in the waiting room. She said, I said, yeah. I said, he's going to call her in. So it's starting to get kind of scary. And so and when my wife got there, the doctor explained that I was having a retinal detachment. And what that was is a retina is a membrane on the back of the eye. And people with bad eyes as bad as mine, the reason for the bad eyesight is the eyeball is elongated somehow. Instead of being round, it's oval shaped. And that puts great pressure on this very delicate fabric or membrane on the back of the eye called the retina. And when you get to be 50 years old, then it starts to tear, and that's what had happened. The retina had torn, and some bodily fluid, blood or something, was leaking between the retina and my eye. So I was going blind in that eye. And she said, take me out in the car, and she asked if the seats recline. I said, yes. She says, have him push the seat down and lay back and drive downtown quickly, but don't hit any bumps. Oh, I had mentioned that by that Monday, the blank spot was right in the center. It was up to the center. It had moved so the focal point, in other words, the spot that you're actually looking, it was just touching that. So I was just on the verge of blindness in that eye. And she said, but it's so fragile that she had to hurry downtown but not hit a bump, because that might have torn the retina off completely. And she would meet us down there for emergency surgery. So that was the scariest moment of my life. I was never in the Army or anything where, any sort of real physical danger, but this was scary, the way she was describing this. So anyway, rushed downtown, and I was in surgery in about an hour. And woke up a few hours later from after the surgery. I could go home. I have to describe what this is like. What they do for a dislocated retina, they drain all of the fluid out of the eyeball, out of the inside of the eyeball. They drain it out completely, and they fill it with a gas bubble. And then it's like putting a splint on a bone. The gas bubble pushes the retina back into place. They also, with laser surgery, they seal the hole somehow. And they seal the other tears. She said I had lots of tears in both eyes. They seal the tears so the liquid can't get back into the eye. And the gas bubble will push the retina back into place. Okay. But of course, its gas bubble is going up. So to push it back into place, and the retina's on the back of the eye. So if you're ahead of me, that meant, how long was it? 2 months? I had to look down 24 hours a day. I could never look up. I had to sleep. I had to sleep with a pile of pillows in my lap, with my face down in it. I'd have a round pillow so I could breathe. I had a special chair that I rented that I'd kneel on and lean forward and look down into a tray. And if I wanted to watch television, I had a mirror. If I wanted to read a book, well, I just slide the book in there. And if that sounds even more difficult to do than, I should say that's even more difficult to do than it sounds. For 2 months I had to look down constantly, walk around. I was looking down. I also had to move carefully. I couldn't do any. She said, don't do any jumping jacks. You have to be very, because this is, the retina is like wet Kleenex. It's so fragile. So for 2 months I was like that. Now, the bubble slowly disappears. The fluids that fill your eye slowly come back in and they replace the bubble. Now the interesting thing is that, you know, as the time went on, I was allowed to look up a little more, until they determined that it was probably in place, but the bubble was yet to disappear. But it would be getting smaller and smaller. Now the interesting thing is, the bubble would, I would see the bubble at the bottom part of my eye. Because what you see through your eyes is upside down and backwards of the way the world actually is. Think about that. It's hard to wrap your mind around, but so we are actually walking around upside down on the planet. And everything you think is up is actually down. And it's also a mirror image of what you actually see. Everything's upside down and backwards from... So the bubble would always be down at the bottom of my vision rather than up at the top, which is where the bubble is, but since I see everything upside down and backwards, it would look like it was down here. And that slowly disappeared. I remember I was at a baseball game when it was gone. Now, after retinal surgery, 6 months later, you have to have cataract surgery, because this surgery on your eye causes a cataract, you know, a very fuzzy quality. You have to have the lens replaced in your eye. I don't mean the lens of your glasses, the lens of your eye. So 6 months later, I went in for cataract surgery, and I was suspecting a problem, because as my vision was, when the bubble disappeared, I remember it was also at the baseball game. Where I sit at the baseball game, there's a wire stretched across that's supposed to be straight. And I started noticing that it wasn't straight. Like what I'm seeing right now, things aren't straight. This side's straight, this side's, it's crooked. But anyway, after cataract surgery and examination, I found out that the surgery was not completely successful. The retina had reattached at an angle, and also it was scarred because it had almost so close to coming completely off. So what I see out of this eye is tilted about, I don't know, 10 degrees, and it's also warped. And then, I don't know if you can see this, but these are my old glasses. This is my good eye, which is not very good, but this is just normal anyway. Normal bad. And you see how thick that lens is. Now when you've had cataract surgery and lens replacement, people do that all the time just voluntarily because they don't like glasses. I like glasses. But it doesn't bother me that I wear glasses. But other people who are vain, they have the lens replacement, and then either they don't have as thick glasses or they don't have to have them at all. But if you can see, this is a very slight prescription here. Very thin, like a normal pair of glasses. But over here it's still big, thick, like the bottom of a Coke bottle. And I don't know if you can see just looking there, but if you wear thicker glasses, you know that anything through this eye, through the thick lens, looks much smaller than it actually is. And anything through the lens that's very thin looks normal size. Now, if both, before when I had thick glasses, thick lenses in both eyes, everything looks smaller to me, but it's all the same. It's all they match. It's relative. That's the word I was searching for. And actually, people with thick glasses can see more than people that don't wear glasses, because we have peripheral vision. We see things happening over to the sides that you poor people who don't wear glasses, you don't see, because we see all around. I'd still rather not have thick glasses, but anyway, if you see what I'm getting at, what I see now out of this eye is level, but it's kind of small, and what I see out of this eye is crooked, warped, and it's very big. So if you get the idea, I can't get these two images together. So I have double vision. And also I can't see things up close any longer. The guy wanted to do cataract surgery on this eye, but I realized that even for the last couple of years that I was drawing, my eyesight was failing to the point where I couldn't see through the glasses at all. I had to just draw like this because I have very clear vision without my glasses if I got really close. But with this eye here, after the lens replacement, I can't see up close. So if he'd have done the same thing with this eye, I wouldn't be able to see it all. You know, I could see the distance. So that's the main reason I can't draw anymore. I sometimes do a cover for a special event, and I'm going to have to, they want me to do some title page illustrations for the Don Rosa collection books. But the way, I think the last cover or two that I did for the Hall of Fame, I did this way. But when I really want to do some careful drawing now, I have to wear an eye patch over this eye and take the glasses off and just work like this. And I still, of course, can't see clearly enough. I can only do covers, you know, large illustrations, and even then I have somebody scan them and I put them on the computer, and then I can blow them up real big, and you know, with the Photoshop I can make little corrections. So I can do covers that way, but I can't do a whole story. And you know, my stories were, that's why people liked them. It's not because they were well drawn, but they had so much detail going on. That's what people enjoyed. So that's why I'm not doing duck comics anymore. That's one of the reasons. That's the main reason I'm not doing duck comics anymore, is I can't see. Now, I guess I can say I've gotten used to it. People have gotten used to much worse things than this. When I notice it the most, when it's the most bothersome, is when I'm walking around, maybe like in a store, or walking through the woods, or just moving around the house, and then I see two of everything, one big and crooked and warped and one small. But actually when I'm, like if I'm watching television and the image is two-dimensional, and it's of course the thing's moving on the TV, but the screen stays the same size and it's a two-dimensional image, my brain can finally just kind of get the two images together, and I really don't notice it. But it's the way it is. Okay. A few more. You want to stop now and finish it up?
Yeah.
But it's almost done. I'm thinking it's 1:30. It's time to eat lunch.
Yeah. And here we go.
Okay, had our little chili break, lunch break. Just a couple more questions here. In the magazines honoring your 60th birthday. 60, I can't possibly be 60 years old. I feel like I'm about 19 or 20. 60. Sit around, don't have any kids. I think it's when you have kids that makes you feel old. Especially when you start having grandkids. I never had any children, so sit around all day playing with the basset hounds and reading comic books and playing pinball machines, and still feel like I did when I was 19, or maybe even 10. Except I can't see very well. In the magazines honoring your 60th birthday, we are featuring two stories, The Black Knight Glorps Again and The Dream of a Lifetime. Could you give us a comment on those stories? Why you wrote them, what you were thinking of or aiming at, etc., and how you rate them in your overall body of work. I don't know if I rate stories, some of them, I guess I'm happier with some stories than others. Well, let's see, The Black Knight Glorps Again. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, that was obviously The Black Knight, The Return of the Black Knight, and I only intended to use him in one story, not as the Black Knight. I guess I could use him just as Arsène Lupin, or Arpin Hussein. I get those names mixed up. Just as the Gentleman Thief, but he's already a millionaire, so he doesn't need to rob anybody. The story about the Black Knight was he was using his Omnisolve, his universal solvent, which he had on a suit of armor, to destroy all of Scrooge McDuck's wealth and make people think he'd stolen it in some magic, apparently magic fashion. So, and I don't know any other way to use the suit of armor. I had him steal, he tried to destroy all the money in the money bin once, and I can't do that story again. So then I had him try to destroy his trophy collection, so I've done that. I don't know what the third thing would have been. Well, like I say, he could have just abandoned his suit of armor, which he doesn't have anymore anyway. I guess he'd always get it back. But just be a gentleman thief. But man, I guess I don't have to worry about that. Somebody else can do it. But that story was all right. Had some action in it. All the different characters, Donald and nephews and Scrooge, all had different things to do, and played a part in defeating the Black Knight. But then the dream of a lifetime. That I do like that story. That was one of my very favorite stories, and the background story behind that one was fans of TV shows like Star Trek and so on. I was going to say the Star Trek websites, the official Star Trek websites, have some sort of disclaimer that they say, please do not send us plot ideas. For various reasons. They're not going to pay them. They're not going to pay for them. Well, they don't have to pay for them. If somebody sends them an idea, it's their property. Plus, if somebody sends them an idea, it may be already an idea they have, and then the guy will get real upset that he thinks he swiped his idea. So they say, just please, we hire people to come up with plot ideas, and we pay people to write them, so please don't send us. And I had that same attitude about plot ideas from fans. Actually, lots of them weren't, the ones I did here weren't of use. Like the most popular one I used to get was one of two. One, tell the story about Huey, Dewey, and Louie's parents, and there's no way to do that. But the other one was have Uncle Scrooge search for the Holy Grail. And I don't know what people expected me to do with the Holy Grail. It's if I did that, I have to bring in the Last Supper and Jesus Christ and Christianity, and I can't do that. I finally managed to slip it into the background of a story in such a way that I didn't have to explain it. It's just part of a bigger treasure in A Letter from Home. So people who know what the Holy Grail is, it's okay, and any readers who don't, it didn't affect the story. But so I wouldn't want people to send me ideas. But of course they send the idea without asking if they can send the idea. And one came from a fan in France. And I think it was just one sentence. What if the Beagle Boys had an invention that they could use to enter Scrooge McDuck's mind and steal his secrets, like his combination to his safe? And then I think they said, and then Donald and Huey, Dewey, and Louie, using the same machine, go in to fight the Beagle Boys. And when I read that instantly, I said, that's a brilliant idea. Because first of all, it obviously Scrooge doesn't. I would show that Scrooge doesn't dream about his money like the Beagle Boys would expect. He dreams about his adventures. And in doing that, I can jump around to different points in Scrooge's life, or more or less in my Life of Scrooge series. And then when Donald went in, I could have Donald participating with Scrooge in past history. And that was great. But also, it's better than, like you do the same thing with time travel, but with time travel, every time they might want to change locations in time or space, they'd have to say, well, let's hurry back to the time machine, and let's go back to the time machine, let's get on the time machine, let's set the well, let's go through time, and then where are we? That might take 2 or 3 pages. But with a dream, it just happens like that. They're in one dream, and then a panel later, they're in another dream. So I knew that was a great idea for that basis. Anyway, I wrote back to this, came in an email. I wrote back to him and I said, I'd like to use a story. I got to pay you for it somehow. I can't afford to pay cash. That's the publisher's business. I said, I can do you a nice drawing. And he said, all right. He traded me the idea for a drawing. And then I said, and also I'd like to, of course, give you credit. When I write it, I always write texts for these stories. I said, I'd like to give you credit for it. He said, no, I don't want to take credit. That seemed kind of strange to me because fans are real proud when they come up with an idea or help out. And I said, all right. I think he agreed. I said I'd hide his initials in the first panel, the same way I hide the D-U-C-K. And he said, oh, that'd be all right. And I still didn't know why he wanted to be anonymous. Anyway, I did the story, and it came out really good. That's one of my very favorite stories. Really a nice ending. I'm real happy with the ending. But anyway, I think it was maybe a year later, I was watching a rented movie, a rented DVD called The Cell. And I realized this is the idea the guy sent me. It was about a psychiatrist who had a machine that would enter disturbed patients' minds and somehow physically fight the other entity that was there that was causing. So this guy, this is the idea the guy sent me. So I got on the internet and I searched for the movie, and I could find the release date when the movie was released in Europe. It was like a month before this guy had sent me this plot idea. So I think he got the idea from the movie, and that's why he didn't want me to give him official recognition for the idea. Oh, I guess that comes along to the, I have to segue into the matter of Inception, that movie that came out a year ago, which the internet was full for a couple of weeks about people saying that the writer-director had stolen the idea from A Dream of a Lifetime. And when I first heard that, and I heard some of the similarities people were describing, I said, oh, that's interesting, but it's a coincidence. It's sort of a, people have been doing stories about characters, you know, going into other people's brains during dreams, and I can name 2 or 3 other movies off the top of my head that were like that. So I figured that was just a coincidence. And then that was much later. I rented. I don't go to movies anymore because the movie screens are getting so tiny, and my TV is getting so much bigger, and they got Blu-ray discs now, so there's no reason to go to a movie. I might try to rent it or buy it later. And then you watch it and watch it again and watch it over again. But anyway, I rented Inception and watched it, and now I'm not so sure. The director of that movie, the writer-director, does comic book movies, so he's obviously familiar with comic books. So there are some really startling similarities that... But even if he did steal the entire idea from my story, it's not my problem, it's Disney's problem. It's not my story, it's Disney's. Disney can sue him for $100 million and they'd keep every penny of it. I don't have any ownership in that idea. But that, he was asking me about the Dream of a Lifetime. That's a story I was very pleased with. Okay, let's see. Here's the last question. There are several fan sites about your work on the internet. Several. I think when I Google my name in there, I come up with like 100,000 hits. And there must be at least 20 or 30 main fan sites. There's about a half dozen really good ones. I've never had a Facebook page. Well, let me mention, almost all authors and artists have their own websites where they communicate with the fans, and I like to communicate with fans, but the real reason people have the websites is to promote their own work. It's to get more people interested, and they'll buy more books or buy more comics, and the author will make more money. I have never had a website, because if I had a website and I promoted my work so well that it sold an extra 1 trillion copies, I'd just be making more money for Disney or the publisher, and they never share it with me. So I let, and plus I wouldn't be able to make websites as nice as the ones that the fans make anyway. I don't have the time, and I don't have the computer savvy for it. Anyway, sites about your work on the internet. Jano Rohleder, who is going to visit you next week, Is that true? You're here, right? Yes. Not only translates your stories into German, but also represents you on the internet. I asked Jano about this, and neither of us know exactly what that means. Nobody represents me on the internet. What are your general ideas about these websites, and are all of them done by people who are in contact with you? My general idea, I'm very thankful. For instance, when I want to find out the date that I did a story, or what comic it appeared in, either in America or Europe, or how many stories I've done, or how many pages a story is, I go to one of these Don Rosa websites, because I don't keep records of any of that. And they keep much better records than I could. And I'm certainly in favor of it. That doesn't, if it promotes my work, like I say, it doesn't make me a penny. But I'm very flattered when people want to put all that, so much of their time into something the same way I used to put so much time into my hobbies. And are all of them done by people who are in contact with you? I have a very strange policy, apart from whether it would make me money in royalties or not. I just am very uncomfortable with self-promotion. In fact, the publishers, it annoys them sometimes when they want me to come over and promote a book or something, and I'll tell the interviewer all about it, and the research, but then I'm supposed to say, I think the typical thing is, and you need to rush out. You're going to love this story. It's great, sensational. I can't do that. I'll say, and I tried my best, and you read it, and hope you like it. And the publisher always said, why don't you promote yourself more? Be less modest. I said, I can't do it. I know I'm just a fan artist. I know my artwork is not good. I can tell how much I enjoy doing it, but I can't tell people it's good. Anyway, are they done by people who I'm in contact with? No. Most all of them I'm in contact with. There's a Facebook page by A.C. Sivbach. He had a Facebook page for a couple of years, and he had a Don Rosa Facebook page. He was a friend of mine, a fan I see when I visit Europe, Denmark, right? And he had this page for several years, and he had up to 15,000 friends or fans or whatever the members are on the page. And then somebody reported him for not. I know the guy's name, and I don't know why he would do this. There must have been some sort of mix-up. He knew that I was aware of this Facebook page, but he knew that Sivbach was not me, and he reported it. And Facebook, it's like eBay, or like lots of these YouTube or something. These sites are too vast, or the networks are too vast for the company that's in charge of them to police it. So when Sivbach's website, Don Rosa website, Facebook page was reported, they took it off. They didn't ask him if he had my permission. They didn't investigate it. They just crippled it. So he didn't know what to do about that, and I finally said, well, just start another page, and we'll put on there somewhere that you are my official representative on the Facebook. But I still have nothing to do with the page. I don't answer questions. I don't. I check in to see what's going on, see what comments people are making. But I don't like to have a web page where I have direct contact with fans. I don't like that idea. It's self-promotion. And I'm very flattered, and I pay attention to them. But there's other websites that people say, could you visit our page and leave a message, or could you visit our page and do this or that? And I say, no, I'll visit the page. I've probably already been visiting the page, and you don't know it, but I don't have any. I don't make any official connection with any website, because to me it's self-promotion. I got a strange thing against that. But when they contact me in private and they want to have a question for me and want to know if they can do this or that, I say I'll communicate with them, but I never do it in public. I think maybe Jano is collecting some copies of some work I used to do back when I was younger, and he may put that on the website. Maybe I'm doing this interview for IHAPA, but that might be on some website, or they might just transcribe it into text. But wherever it goes, I will look at it and be nice, but I won't have any direct contact or communication with the people through any of these sites. I think that's the last question.
Okay, that's been the long Don Rosa interview. Thank you, Don, for answering with such great patience all of my questions and even reading them. Thank you, Jano, for recording it, and to all of you who've hopefully enjoyed the interview. Bye-bye. See you in the comics. This is Wolfgang Fuchs signing off.